their reporting was influenced by that? Yeah. But that doesn't matter, because there's actually way bigger concerns than travel and food. I'll tell you what it is after the break. Welcome back. So those free trips to China and private dinners with a group linked to the Chinese
Dear Brendan,
sure seems
I gotta show you
sketchy,
something really important.
but it actually gets much worse. If you've seen our early episode, how 5 mega corporations control everything you watch on TV, you know 5 mega corporations control everything you watch on TV. And guess what? Those companies have deep financial interests in China. Same with major newspapers. The largest shareholder of the New York Times is Mexican billionaire Carlos Slim. Slim? Maybe let's just call him Carlos. Anyway, Carlos has important Chinese investments. For instance, he worked with China's JAC Motors to make cars in Mexico for the Latin American market. Forbes said it was a way of circumventing the Trump administration's trade policies. The New York Times has been very critical of Trump's China trade policies, like with opinion pieces like this, and this, and this. This year, Bloomberg reported on a deal between Carlos Slim and Huawei. You know, the Chinese company that poses a national security risk. So Carlos Slim has vested interests in China. Do his Chinese business deals influence how the New York Times covers China? It's hard to say. And New York Times journalists have occasionally done some really solid reporting on China, like this expose on how China organized mass detentions of Muslims. But with certain sensitive China topics, the New York Times won't cover them at all. Like how Chinese state-run hospitals, like this one, are systematically killing Falun Gong practitioners and Uyghurs for their organs. And the New York Times isn't the only American newspaper owned by a billionaire with deep ties to China. Let's look at billionaire Michael Bloomberg. According to Mr. Bloomberg, Chinese leader Xi Jinping is not a dictator.
The Communist Party wants to stay in power in China, and they listen to the public. Xi Jinping is not a dictator. He has to satisfy his constituents, or he's not going to survive. And
He's not a dictator?
no, he has a constituency to answer to.
Is the check on him just a revolution?
You're not going to have a revolution. No government survives without the will of the majority of its people. Okay?
Now, totally separate from that, Michael Bloomberg's personal fortune is largely dependent on him being in the good graces of the Chinese Communist Party. You see, the biggest part of his company, Bloomberg LP, is selling Bloomberg terminals. They provide financial data to professional investors. They make up around 85% of the company's profits. Thousands of those terminals are in China. And their expensive monthly subscription relies on access to Chinese data. And guess who controls access to China's financial markets? The Chinese government can shut down Bloomberg's data access at any time. And that would affect Bloomberg LP's entire business, not just in China, but in every country where it sells terminals. Of course, the Bloomberg terminals are also a way to send billions of US investor dollars to China. And over the last couple of years, a Bloomberg index fund has helped support 364 Chinese firms by directing an estimated $150 billion into their bond offerings, including 159 controlled directly by the Chinese government. How has Bloomberg the business affected Bloomberg the news outlet? Well, Bloomberg News has certainly been critical of the trade war, with articles like Trump's trade war with China doesn't look like a win, and trade war madness puts world on thin ice. Bloomberg News has actually been accused of curbing articles that might anger China. Ironically, that was in the New York Times. Bloomberg also had a special code they put on sensitive articles they didn't want published on Bloomberg terminals inside China. Because again, Bloomberg Media is part of Bloomberg LP, which gets 85% of its profits from those terminals, which require access to the China market. The former Bloomberg CEO said, if you have a $9 billion company that is about to be crippled by a news division that loses $100 million a year, shouldn't you take a breath and think about the implications of what you're doing? Oh, I'm sorry, I can't take a breath. I'm too busy choking on my rage. In fact, let's take a commercial break. Then I'll be back to talk about Jeff Bezos. Welcome back. So how about Jeff Bezos, the billionaire owner of Amazon.com? He owns the Washington Post. Bezos has said Amazon is well positioned to serve China. I mean, not so much serving the Chinese laborers working long hours in unsafe conditions in Amazon's China factories. Bezos must have been talking about serving the Chinese government for his own financial benefit. We also know the Washington Post has accepted millions of dollars from a Chinese propaganda outlet. Actually, several major newspapers have. The Washington Post got $4.6 million. The New York Times got $50,000. The Wall Street Journal got a cool $6 million. I mean, democracy dies in darkness, so you gotta pay the electricity bills somehow. So these examples were all individual billionaires who own newspapers and have deep financial ties to China. Can't believe that's a thing. Now, when it comes to TV networks, they're tied even more deeply to China. Most of them are owned by one of these 5 mega corporations I covered in my episode from 2015. They all have major interests in China. For example, CNN is owned by Warner Media. Back in 2013, when it was called Time Warner, it invested $50 million in China. At the time, the CEO said, increasing our global presence is one of Time Warner's strategic priorities, and China is one of the most attractive territories in which we operate. But it is complex. There's all kinds of ways these shady multinational corporations may influence the media companies they own to benefit their China investments. For example, remember the story of Democratic California Representative Eric Swalwell, an alleged Chinese spy, Fang Fang? According to Fox News, many major media weren't giving this story airtime. NBC and MSNBC are owned by Comcast. Top shareholders there include Vanguard and BlackRock, both of which invest heavily in China. CBS is owned by National Amusements. That runs Paramount and MTV. And China is a major market for both. CBS also has business interests in China. And CBS even censored their show The Good Fight for a musical short that made fun of Chinese censorship. And what about Disney? Disney, of course, has huge interests in China.